This week's portion is known as chukas. Chuka, the word chuka means statute. We mentioned many times, besides the Torah being divided to positive and negative commandments, but in the nature of the laws, some of them are known as rational laws, and referred to as mishpatim. Mishpat is a rational, for instance. Torah says a person is not permitted to steal. A person has ownership rights. There's marriage, there's divorce, there's exclusivity in relationships. That's rational laws. We understand, because unless you have certain parameters and lines that people can't cross, you can't have a community, a cohesive community. People have to respect one another's rights and boundaries. That's mishpatim. Those are rational laws. Then we have laws which are called testaments. The Shabbos is a testament. It's a testament that God created the world. That's why we keep the Shabbos. And then we have statutes. Statutes means it's not a testament. Observing Pesach, Passover, that's a testament. The Jews went out of Egypt, and because the dough did not rise, it become leavened. Therefore, to commemorate that, or whatever, we observe Pesach a certain way. The Paschal Lamb also was the deity of the Egyptians. We severed our relation with idolatry. Therefore, we bring the Paschal Lamb on the 14th of Nisan. Okay, that's testament. Then we have chukim. Chuka is a statute, meaning on a rational level, you cannot understand its value. For instance, dietary laws. Only certain species are kosher, others are not. If it has two signs, yes, one sign, not. It has to be ritually slaughtered. And ritual slaughter is very specific. Why? Cooking milk and meat, a Jew is not permitted not only not to eat it, a Jew is not permitted to benefit from it. Not only are you not permitted to eat it or benefit from it, the one who cooks the combination is in violation of a negative commandment. Why? You cook any other kosher, not kosher food item, you're not in violation. But taking milk and meat, cooking them together, not only forbidden to eat, to benefit, and the one who actually cooks them together is in violation. What about if you marinate meat in milk and it's fully absorbed? Although the absorption is complete, you're not in violation of anything. And you're permitted to benefit from it. Eat not, but that's rabbinical. That's rabbinical. On Torah level, you're permitted, because it wasn't cooked together. Shatnez, a combination of wool and linen in one garment, Torah says you're not permitted. Why? Because Torah says you're not permitted. That's a statute. We can't, there's not even a point of entry to be able to appreciate why it's not permitted. These are all statutes, laws that were ordained by God at Sinai. There's no question it's divine laws, but God did not share with us the inside scoop, why it's beneficial for us spiritually to refrain and not to engage in these various areas. Okay? That's chukah. The ultimate statute is the statute which we discussed in this week's portion, the red heifer. Now, any other contamination, when we speak about contamination, something becomes contaminated, but in Hebrew it's called tamei. You could relieve that contamination if you meet certain criteria. What is it? If you immerse yourself in rainwater that accumulates, and you have a certain volume of that rainwater, and you immerse yourself fully in it, when you come out of that water, you've relieved yourself of that contamination. If you immerse yourself in a river, which has an underground source, a feeder, and you fully immerse yourself, and the water touches every part of your body, you're relieved of that contamination. But if you come in contamination with the dead, you could go to the, what we call the mikveh, or you go into the river or the ocean. You're not relieved. The only way you're relieved you have to undergo the red heifer process. And that's what Torah discusses here. You take a cow, female cow, that's all red, which is impossible even to locate. It's such an unusual situation. It can't even have two black hairs. It has to be totally red. And what about if a yoke was put on that animal? Or some burden was put on the animal? The animal's disqualified. Then it's burnt. And ultimately, if it's burnt, you burn it outside the camp. It's slaughtered outside the camp. You burn it, you take its ashes, you mix it with water that comes from a living wellspring. You sprinkle, the Kohen sprinkles it on the contaminated person on the 3rd and 7th day. Then he goes to the mikveh. Afterwards, he's relieved of the contamination. Without that, you cannot detach that impurity from him. That's called the process of the red heifer. So we have the most extreme level of contamination. You cannot release it from that person unless you undergo this process. So it means this is the ultimate purifier. No contamination could stand up to this process. So what would you think? The ones who burn the animal, the ones who carry its ash, the ones who mix it with the water, they definitely should be contaminated. But yet, there's an enigma here. It purifies the contaminated at the most extreme level, but all those who are involved in the process to bring it about, they become contaminated. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make any sense. It's contradictory. Its innateness has the ability to remove the most extreme level of contamination, which nothing could. But those who participate in the process to bring it about and who sprinkled so on, those people become contaminated. That is the statute here. It's like you say, it doesn't add up. If it's that, how do we understand the ramifications of it, that it contaminates all those who are associated with it? And that's the reason why it's a statute. But the Torah refers to this statute as, this is the ultimate statute. This is Zos Chukas Torah. And Torah is pointing it out. If you think for a moment, you'll be able to understand the inner workings of this statute. It's impossible to know it. It's an impossibility. I'm telling you up front, it's impossibility. Very often, people feel. Now, if a person is working on a problem, and you're a smart guy, and somehow you can't figure it out, what happens? And you really want to understand it, you become frustrated. There's a degree of frustration. Why? Because not being able to figure it out and to understand it, you see it as a reflection on yourself. Evidently, I'm lacking in the ability to come to a solution, whether it's a solution or an understanding. And if you really want it, you'll seek out other people's input, and you still can't. And you become frustrated. At the end of the day, you consult with the wisest, most brilliant people, and they all say, we don't know. But it reflects badly. But you should know. You should be able to figure it out. You know what the answer is? It's probably nonsense. Because if it push comes to shove and it reflects on you that it's lacking your capacity to understand, that's a big pill to swallow. So very often person says, something, that proves it's baseless because it doesn't make sense. Rather than saying it makes sense, but it's beyond my capacity, person says it doesn't make sense. Therefore, it's okay. God, when it comes to the red heifer, God says up front, this statute is the ultimate statute. Other ones, you may be able to come to some level of understanding. This one, it's impossible. So I'm telling you up front, it has nothing to do with you. The human intellect was never endowed to the degree that you could deal with this kind of issue. It's beyond your capacity. As a result of that, there's no basis for frustration here. Like if you would ask somebody, what pre-existed existence? Only God. And who's God? Could you describe me God? God is infinite. He's not, you can't describe him. It's beyond any finite being cannot relate to something which is infinite. That's the bottom line. God says up front, this issue of the paraduma, of the red heifer, in terms of the way it works, it's not comprehensible. It's not fathomable. Nobody understands it. It's beyond human intelligence. We're going to see the Midrash says the only person who understood the inner workings of the red heifer was Moshe Rabbeinu. Why? Because God shared it with him. But if God wouldn't have shared it with him, he wouldn't have understood it. We find that King Solomon, Shlomo Melech, the wisest man who ever existed, he was endowed with divine wisdom. Nobody else's wisdom could compare to what he was. I will read a Medrash in a moment, that if you take all the scholars of his Jewish history, put them on one side of the scale, and him on the other side of the scale, he outweighs them. So this is a level of genius which surpasses anything. It's not fathomable what level of genius he had. And he said, as wise as I am, it's beyond my grasp. So if King Solomon says he doesn't understand it, you're going to tell me it's nonsense. If you can't figure it out, evidently it must be not right. King Solomon said it is right, but it's beyond his ability. So as a result of that, it doesn't reflect on the issue that it's not correct. It is correct. It's the word of God. But it's so profound and so broad and deep and wide, it's beyond human capacity. Therefore, Zos Chukas Torah. This is the ultimate statute. Why does the Torah have to go out of its way? It's no different. Many things are beyond our capacity. But here the Torah goes out of its way to say, this is the ultimate statute. So over here, the Medrash, and Rashi alludes to it from the Medrash, that the Jewish people are continuously criticized. Our behavior is a little archaic. They'll attribute it superstition, it's this, it's what. And very often we can't respond. And they pick certain things to criticize us, to prove that this is like backward. This backward behavior, any intelligent person would not accept this. And it gives examples of where they criticize us. Rabbi Yeshua, the Sichlim B'Shem Reb Levi Omar. Arbar Dvarim, Yetzirah, Meishav Aleim. The four areas where the evil inclination goes and whispers in their ear. He has a claim. Uksiv ben Chukah. And the answer to the evil inclination is Chukah. That's the answer. You understand? He says, you're supposed to understand. Why don't you understand it? You know what the answer is? Chukah. The Torah puts a label on it. It's not understandable. Ve'eluhein, what are they? Eishesach. A person is not permitted to marry the wife of his brother. If she's widowed or divorced, you're not permitted to marry her. It's an incestuous relationship. Kilayim. Wearing a combination of wool and linen, you're not permitted. That's called shatnez. You're not permitted. V'sar mishtaleach, the goat that was thrown down the mountainside, that brought about atonement for the whole Jewish people, carried all the sins on it. Uparaduma, the red heifer. What's Eshesach? What's the case of the marrying the wife of your sister, your brother, which is considered an incestuous relationship? The chsiv erves esh lo segala. One's not permitted to engage sexually with the wife of your brother. What about why? Even if she's widowed, even if she's divorced. What about meis lo banim? Let's say that brother was married to this woman, he died childless. Yivama Yavu Leo. The Torah says, in that instance, as much as normally would be incestuous relationship, there's a positive commandment to perpetuate the name of the deceased, and there's a mitzvah to marry that woman. Yeah? This is contradictory. If marrying a sister-in-law is incestuous, and therefore the child is a mamzer, and it carries a very serious liability, why, if now the woman, if the man dies childless, not only is it not a prohibition, there's a mitzvah to marry the woman. But if something innately is contrary and contradictory and detrimental to your spirituality, how do you do now engage in this, which is considered positive? That's one example. Kilayim. What's a combination wool linen? The chsiv lo silba shatnes. A Jew is not permitted to wear a combination wool linen. Sadin betzitzis. What about if you have a four-cornered garment made of linen? Mutter. You permit it to put wool strings into the corners of that garment, tie it in. What have you created? You've created a combination wool and linen. Uchsiv bo chukah. It says chukah. That is my statute. It's contradictory. If wool and linen creates an energy which is detrimental to spirituality, why, if that wool is strings, which is tzitzis, why is it permitted and you fulfill a mitzvah with it? What's Sarah Mishtalech? Sending the goat down the mountainside, which brings atonement for the Jewish people. The one who sends that goat down the mountainside, he's contaminated. He has not only is he contaminated, his clothing is contaminated. But yet, when he throws that goat down the mountainside and he becomes dismembered, it atones for the whole Jewish people. And it says over there, it's a chukah. Paraduma, what's the red heifer? Ditnan. Whoever's involved in the process from the very beginning till the conclusion, metam megodim. Not only are they contaminated, their clothing are contaminated. The gufa meteres megodim. But yet, if you have a garment that came in contact with the dead, you sprinkle that water on that garment, it purifies it. And over there it says chukah. Zos chukah satorah. So what is the issue? When the evil inclination comes in, whispers in the air, he doesn't say, why don't you eat chop suey? Chop suey you're not permitted to eat. But why dietary laws? A Jew has no problem accepting dietary laws, although it's a statute. The problem is that if within the law, we find contradictions. If it's not permitted, why here is it permitted? It's very interesting. If you get a prescription from your doctor, some type of antibiotic, it says you should not share your prescription with another person. I mean, why would a person share his prescription with another person? Because his friend says, I have a problem. And a person says, I have a similar ailment. I have a similar bacteria. The doctor prescribed this. You may think it's identical, but it's not. Maybe the other person needs a different kind of antibiotic. So unless you know it's the same, you can't share it. Very often, the rabbi will give a ruling, it's permitted. And then he says to somebody else, it's not permitted. So people say, rabbi has some kind of bias against me. Whenever I ask him a question, he says it's not permitted. And to you, he always says it's permitted. The question is it the same question? You're asking, and even if it is, there may be other issues which have a bearing why, if the other person's permitted you, it's not permitted. It has nothing to do with a bias. I'll give you an example. There's a famous story, Rav Shmuel Salant in Yerushalayim, in the area of Meisharim, there's a street called Rehov Salant. That's the name of the street, Rehov Salant. It's named after, he was the chief rabbi of the old community of Yerushalayim until the early part of the 20th century. His name was Shmuel Salant, and he was a genius of a person. And he had an insight which very few people had. And this woman who lived in Yerushalayim, there was a question about the kashrus of her cholent. Cholent is the staple of a Shabbos meal. In those days, people didn't have much to eat. And she brings the question to the rabbi, and the rabbi says, the cholent is not kosher. You have to throw it out. It's not kosher. Another woman also had a question with her cholent. And the rabbi ruled she's permitted to eat it. These two women meet Shabbos afternoon. One woman says Shabbos was not the same. The Shabbos we didn't have cholent. Because this was my issue. Went to the rabbi. The rabbi says, you're not permitted to eat it. So the other woman says, we enjoyed the cholent. And I had the exact same issue. I went to the rabbi. The rabbi says, I'm permitted to eat it. So she says, this doesn't make any sense. If we have the same issue, why for you did he rule you're permitted? For me, he told me to throw it away. So the lady went to the rabbi. And she says, why? So he explained to the woman that in the code of laws it says that there is a lenient opinion you can rely on only if it's an extreme financial loss. This other woman, because she's destitute, for her to throw out the cholent was considered an extreme financial loss. For you, it's not the end of the world. So for you, you can't rely on that more lenient opinion. So that has nothing to do with a bias. Why for me, you're more stringent, and for her, you're more lenient. There's nothing to do with this. But if you don't understand the law, right away, you frame it and you see it through your own lens. The rabbi has it in for me. He's always ruling more stringently for me. He's tying my hands. There's nothing tying your hands. If you don't understand things, you don't understand. So what we don't understand, a species has one sign, it's not kosher. It's not a problem. But here we're dealing with situations where in one instance it's permitted, other instance not permitted, although it's the same combination. If it's tzitzis, it's permitted. The combination, although the tzitzis are wool and the garment's linen, not a problem. It's a mitzvah. But yet, if you have a cardigan that has wool and linen, you're not permitted to wear it. That's a Torah violation. But why? In either case, you have the same mixture. Chukah. That's a statute. You have to understand why. But when the evil inclination whispers in the air and always wants to throw a monkey wrench into the whole understanding, it's always something which you do understand and you have proof that it's something negative, and yet simultaneously, in another instance, it's positive. That's what we're talking about over here. A number of other examples given in the Midrash, besides these four. There are others. So the Midrash says, Hashem says to Moshe, Ani megala lecha tampora. It's a Midrash. You, I will reveal the understanding of the red heifer. Aval acherim, but to others, chukah. You hear this? Moshe Rabbeinu received the Torah to pass it on to the Jewish people, to teach us. God said, this you're not permitted to reveal. For you, I'm revealing it. For the Jewish people, they're not permitted to know it. It has to remain a statute. But it's something interesting. Now that Moshe understands it, why did he have to reveal it to Moshe? The understanding of this statute. As no Jew knows it, including King Solomon says, it's beyond my grasp. Despite my divine endowment of wisdom, why did he have to share with Moshe Rabbeinu? He says, I'm revealing it to you, but for everybody else, it's a statute. To the degree that even King Solomon doesn't understand it. Because the only reason we understand it because I'm sharing it with you. So if it's such a chukah, such a statute, why share with Moshe? Now, Moshe Rabbeinu was the only Jew who was qualified to receive the Torah at Sinai. Moshe was the conduit. Through him, the Torah was given to the Jewish people. No other Jew was qualified. Why? Now, we've had multiple times, what was the dimension of Moshe Rabbeinu's soul? Moshe Rabbeinu, it says in Chazal, many times Rashi cites it, Hayeshokol Kineged Yisrael. He was the equivalent of the whole Jewish people. The dimension of his soul was the equivalent of the whole Jewish people. So when God communicated the Torah to Moshe, Who is Moshe? Moshe is the totality of the Jewish people. Now the Jewish people receive the Torah, he's passing it on and disseminating it and elucidating it for what? For the Jews. But initially, the connection with God and the person who receives it, it has to be the Jewish people. Moshe was the equivalent of the Jewish people. You understand? If Torah has been given to Jewish people, the understanding of the paradum of the red heifer has to be understood. Moshe Rabbeinu being the equivalent of Jewish people, the Torah is fully being given with its understanding to the Jewish people. Now, when Moshe passes it on, the others don't understand it, but it's not a deficiency in the transmission of Torah from God to the Jewish people. Because God, when he gave it to Moshe, Moshe understood it, so he fully grasped whatever was given from God to the Jewish people, because Moshe is the Jewish people. Because he shokol connected Yisrael. Rashi cites Rav Moshe Darshan, who cites Midrashim, that all aspects of the Paraduma was a replication, symbolism of the sin of the golden calf. At Sinai, when we said Nasav and Nishma, from that moment until the golden calf, what happened to us? We assumed the level of Adam. Our classification was Odom. Who was Odom? Who was Adam before he ate of the tree of knowledge? He was an eternal being. He would have lived eternally. But God said to him, all the fruit of the tree of the garden of Eden is permitted to you, except one tree not, the tree of knowledge. And the day you eat that fruit, you'll be subject to death. And of course, he failed. So why is all humanity subject to death? Because we all descend from Adam. When he said, you'll be subject to death, that means mankind till the end of the time is subject to death. At Sinai, when God offered us the Torah, and we said, Nasav Nishma, we accept unequivocally. We immediately ascended to a level of pre-sin of Adam. And the Gemara, the Talmud quotes a verse that we considered B'nei Kel Chai. If we wouldn't have worshipped the golden calf, the Jews would have lived eternally. We would have lived eternally. What happened when we worshipped the golden calf? We reverted back to post-sin. If it's post-sin, that means you have to die. Because when you do to ingesting of that fruit, there's an impurity in you, and that impurity cannot be expunged, cannot be extracted from you. The only way it can be extracted, you must die, decompose, and what's going to be resurrected is going to be the pure matter. But if not for the tree of the sin of the golden calf, we reverted back to pre-sin. The Egel brought about our spiritual downfall. We reverted back to post-sin. And that's why we're subject to death. So it uses a term that the ash of the red heifer is lemishmeres. It's there for safekeeping. So Rashi cites the Chazal that the sin of the golden calf is in place till the end of time. Although we were forgiven, now, who were the officiants at Sinai before the golden calf? The firstborn. But because the Jewish people were all involved in idolatry, the firstborn became tainted. Who took that place as the officiants? The tribe of Levi. Aaron's family were the elite of the tribe of Levi, but the Levites, they assisted the Kohanim in their service in the Mishkan, or eventually in the Beis HaMikdash, the temple. Why? Because when the Jews sinned with the golden calf, they became tainted. They became spiritually impure. And that impurity disqualified the firstborn from officiating. The Levi, which did not participate in the golden calf, they were qualified. Okay, so now it says the sin of the golden calf is with us till the end of time, and whenever we're punished for any punishment, part of the punishment includes the sin of the golden calf. So I asked the question: if we were forgiven at Sinai, and that's Moshe brought us a second set of tablets, which is an indication of the reinstatement, and we have a Mishkan. So what do you mean? Every time we're punished for a sin, for a transgression, part of the punishment includes the sin of the golden calf. We're forgiven already. Let bygones be bygones. Why does it continuously haunt us? Now, what we just explained, it's very understandable. If not for Chet Egel, the whole concept of sin wouldn't have had any relevance. The Jewish people reached a level of perfection. We would have lived eternally. But because we participated in the golden calf, what happened? We reverted back to post-sin. So when you sin, whatever you sin, 3,000 years after the golden calf, why are you sinning? It's because of what? Because of the golden calf. Because the golden calf brought us back to post-sin. We have the impurity of the tree of knowledge. Therefore, now we transgress. And we have the ability to rein in ourselves. We did not. So over here, we get what we call a double whammy. First, you transgressed. But why did you transgress? Because the golden calf was done. So there's liability for the golden calf because that liability causes us to cross the second line. Otherwise, there would have not been a second line. If they would have been able to withstand the temptation not to eat of the tree of knowledge, here, if they would have withstood the temptation not participating in the golden calf, they would have been tainted. They would have remained B'nai Kel Chai, they would have remained eternal people. We're not eternal because of that. Because of the golden calf, that's what we sin. So therefore, there's a linkage between the golden calf and any transgression that takes place from that moment till later. That's the understanding. There's a midrash. When God created the world, put Adam in the Garden of Eden, he says, Adam, I want to explain you something. I created a perfect world, one of a kind of world. It says he was put in the garden to watch it and to work it and to watch over it, to make sure things remain intact. So he says to Adam, I created this unbelievable world for you. Please maintain it and watch over it. Because if you destroy it, the consequences and the ramifications are disastrous. Why? Because if you eat of the tree of knowledge, not only you're going to be subject to death, all humanity till the end of time is subject to death. In addition, if you don't eat, the world achieves its love of perfection. The whole concept of sin has no relevance anymore. If you eat, you take the house down. Every chil Hashem, every sin, every transgression, from that moment onward is due to what? Because he ate of the tree of knowledge. So the tree of knowledge actually set the dynamic for every sin that will ever take place till the end of time. Therefore, when you're punished, we were able to overcome that at Sinai. But what happened when we did the golden calf? We reverted back to post-sin. So therefore, we have the culpability. Why are we back to the sin of Adam? Because we did the golden calf. As a result of that, when we're punished for the transgression, we're also punished for the golden calf. The golden calf is the crux of the problem that caused us to be where we're at. That's the understanding. Certain people, when they listen to something, very often their listening is an art. It's not simple to listen. Why? Because when you listen very often, as you're listening, you want to say something. You want to interject. You want to respond. So the man has only spoken a third of what he's going to say, You're not fully being attentive to what he's saying because you're already thinking of what you're going to tell him. So unless you listen closely from the beginning to end and fully grasp what he's saying, now we can talk. So you have to shelve your question you want to ask, put it out of your mind to be focused on what's being said. That's what it is. Otherwise, you have a problem. You don't listen properly. Very often, a person says, I'm trying to understand, but I can't understand. And as I said before, if I don't understand, it's usually a reflection not on the person, but on the subject matter, which you can't understand. It's always there. It's never the person. It's always the other one. Person fails. He's always looking who to blame. Is it my parents, my siblings, my rabbi, my community, but never the person himself. He's the last one to be accused of that failing or the cause of that failing. That's the way it is. Hashem heads you off at the pass. Get started. Paraduma, red heifer, most enigmatic mitzvah. There's no rhyme, reason, it's contradictory from all ends. So you can throw up your hands and say, this really doesn't make sense. God says it makes good sense. The only one I ever revealed it to was Moshe. The rest of you, you don't have the capacity to understand it. That's why I never revealed it. So you can't say to God, well, you're trying to hoodwink us. It really doesn't make sense, but you want to impose it on us. If you believe in God, you understand that statement isn't possible to even consider. That God is trying to give you something which doesn't make sense, just go through the motions. It has a rationale. It has a validity. You're not worthy to understand what it is. Moshe Rabbeinu will receive it because I'm going to communicate. But even Moshe himself, if God wouldn't have revealed to him, he would have come upon this himself. The inner workings, the truth of the paradum of the red heifer. There's a story, a non-Jew has no obligation of honoring his parents. Kabedis avicha v'simecha is not one of the 7 Noahide laws. So the Talmud tells a story. There was a non-Jew. His name was Ben Doma. What was his name? And we know that the high priest, he wore a breastplate, and it had 12 precious stones on the breastplate, each one carrying one of the names of the 12 tribes. And some of the stones had to be replaced for whatever reason. So they heard that this non-Jew, who was a precious stone merchant, he has those stones they need. And the son's name was Ben Doma. He was Doma, he's Ben Doma, son of Doma. So they come and they say to the Gentile family, whatever you set the price, we're willing to pay you. You can ask any price you want. We're going to buy it. So what happened? It turned out that the chest in which the diamonds were, these gold studs were, his father was sleeping, and he slept with his feet on the chest. And the only way he's able to get to the diamonds, he has to wake his father. He says, I'm sorry, I'm not waking my father. They said, but you realize if you don't give it to us, we'll leave it. We're going to seek it out elsewhere. He says, doesn't make a difference. I will not wake up my father for any amount of money in the world. And they went off. Fast forward a year later, a red heifer is born into his herd. Meaning, God compensated him endless times over. When he came, and they heard he had the red heifer, the same person who originally had the colored stones. They say to him, we're willing to pay any amount of money for the red heifer, because it's nearly impossible to find. It's almost like a miracle that God presents it in somebody's herd. So Ben Doma says to them, I know I could charge you any price I want, anything. That's how important the red heifer is, because Jews can't be relieved of their spiritual contamination without it. But as long as you give me the amount of money which will make up for the profit that I would have made on those precious stones, you can have the red heifer. Although I can ask multiples more. I'm not interested in multiples more. I just want it to be the equivalent of the sale that I would have sold you those precious stones. That's Ben Doma. That's the story. until the coming of Mashiach, all Jews are contaminated. Sometime in our lives, we were exposed to contamination of the dead. Person says, I was never in a cemetery. I never saw a corpse. How are you all contaminated? We read in the portion that any metal implement or vessel, which is under the same roof with a corpse, it becomes contaminated, and the level of contamination, because it's metal, assumes the identical contamination as the corpse itself. So therefore, that, although Kohen is permitted to contaminate himself with that level of contamination, but it cannot be relieved unless you have the red heifer. So that means every house that hasn't been a person there for years, the hinges on the door, which are made of metal, or what you put through the hinge, which is a metal rod which holds it together, the pin, that generates contamination of the dead, as if the dead is within your proximity. Therefore, you contaminate it. Okay, I think we're going to stop here, and I'll entertain some questions.